Sent in again. Yordi device for Wilkes! Stoppage time against Neil Warnock again. And Malik Wilkes has come up with the goal, which could just break Hull City's hoodoo. 13 games they've had to wait. And it is a massive 3 points if they can hold their nerve for 2 more minutes.
Hello and welcome to the final episode of the flashback series, the 2010s that we've been running. I'm your host for this episode, Alex, and with me I have Dan. How are you, Dan?
Yep, I'm all right. Called in at the last minute, so you know, it feels like I've been called up from the under-21s to start in the championship or something. I'm feeling very underprepared and overwhelmed.
Yeah. No, very much appreciated. Well, I was just saying before we went to air, it is kind of crazy to think we started this series. October 2020 was the first episode that we did, which was looking back at the 2010-2011 season, which we started this series over the sort of the lockdown period when I think we sort of, half floated the idea of starting a Patreon and getting people interested in that, which didn't really pan out, but it did sort of spawn this series of videos, which I guess now that we've got a complete set, it does make it sort of like a nice little look back on the 2010s. But it is kind of wild to think that, we're sort of sat here just about 5 years later, talking about this 2019-20 season. And to pull back the curtain, we did both sort of say before we went to air, not many individual games stick in the memory from this season, which is kind of crazy to say about, a season that was only 5 years ago. But I guess it really just sort of highlights there wasn't too many memorable moments from this half of the season, Dan.
No, well, I think like the key thing is this is what everyone remembers about this half of the season is the rapid and tragic downhill slide that we went on, picking up what was one win and a handful of draws in the last half of the season. So not
let me pull that up.
Not great. Probably about 8 points out of the 30 something or think that were available or something, or even more. So
three wins and three draws and a win. Yeah,
I guess it's six points out of whatever it was, 13 games or something.
19 games.
19 games. It was a full. Oh yeah, okay, even better. So
yeah,
it's at 6 points from 57.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, good quick maths cool. There. Yeah.
So not the best return ever.
I think it is actually mathematically.
It puts Walter's reign, at the beginning in perspective.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
crazy way.
It's remarkable that McCann actually kept his job following this, because it is mathematically, I think, the worst ever. I mean, it's got to be the worst ever finish to a championship season. To go from what were we comfortably 8th, sort of looking on the cusp of the playoffs coming into January. This picture here, which is, sort of for the context of this half of the season, was clearly the highest point of the season. Was we played Chelsea in the FA Cup in front of basically a sold out. I think it was the KCOM back then, not the MKM. Bowen, I think Grosicki scored. Bowen played. It was sort of like, we're actually going so well. Crowds are coming back. Like, we're on the up. It's all exciting. Rugs kind of pulled out from under our feet with the sale of Bowen Grosicki, and it just kind of collapsed from there.
Yeah. Obviously this is where we're getting to the end of the alum reign. And I guess like those sales were kind of like the last hurrah, just about, because those sales, like especially like Bowen and Grosicki, and I get like where we were and like where we're going to finish and giving them the opportunity, but like that just it crueled our season to sell. Like not like one of your best, but to sell your 2 best players, your 2 real attacking weapons that had basically would have scored probably 90% of our goals in the first half of the season, because I don't remember the numbers, but they were both pretty high in goals and assists in the first half. To do that, like I just it was it was devastating. And I think like the other thing is like hugely deflating and demoralizing for a change room, for, you know, to have a squad there and be rallied around, and especially like with, you know, on the last day of the window as well, you get all the through them, you're like, you know, and they're going, we're gonna keep this together, we're gonna get through this season, and we're gonna, you know, we're there, we will push for the playoffs. And then it all, as you say, like the rug's pulled out from under everyone, and it all sort of just falls in a heap. Like, you know, obviously, you know, for Bowen, it's worked out reasonably well. You know, he's built himself up at West Ham, and, you know, he's club captain, and you know, playing for England and all those sorts of things now. But it was devastating for us at the time, and I think we just didn't really know how to recover from that. We didn't have anyone remotely close to that sort of quality filling that void, and you know, the players that came in certainly weren't any sort of a like for like replacement. So
you mean James Scott from where did he sign from? Motherwell. Wasn't, you know, or oh geez, who was the other one? It's James Scott. Well, James Scott was meant to be like the new Bowen, but there was like, you know, Martin Samuelson we got in from West Ham. Of course, you know, Marcus Maddison coming in from Peterborough, who was meant to be, you know, this great attacking player. It was an interesting end to that window, and it's interesting, I guess, also just looking back on January as a whole, because I think with hindsight, I look back and go, oh, you know, selling Bowen, and like you're saying as well, selling Bowen and Grosicki was sort of the end. But it's interesting, sort of looking at the fact. So he beat Sheff Wednesday on the 1st of January, and I think we were sitting 8th at that point. But we then lost to Fulham, Derby, Huddersfield, and then also Brentford was February. So Fulham, Derby, and Huddersfield. And you go, it's interesting that in the first half of that window, I think we brought in Herbie Kane on loan from Liverpool. We brought in Malik Wilks from Barnsley, and I want to say Samuelson, I think, from West Ham, all earlier in the window. And you kind of go, okay, maybe at that point the alums are going, maybe we can push for the playoffs. Maybe we do try and invest. And then after those 3 losses, they probably went, no, it's not going to happen. Let's cash in, get Bowen sold. And you do sort of think in hindsight with COVID, it was almost the perfect time to cash in that sense, because I think the fee we would have got from him in the summer would have been like nothing, because everyone just freaked out with COVID. They didn't know when it was going to end, how it was going to impact football. We almost got this almost inflated fee that kind of kept us going through those COVID seasons because of just, you know, the uncertainty that everyone had.
Yeah, and I think obviously the other, like, even just sort of, I guess, more to that point is that all of those sorts of sales in that era were all about, you know, reducing the debt that the club owed the alums. So I guess, like, you know, without those sales, we maybe don't even, you know, the club isn't at a, you know, on offer for at a price that, you know, eventually Ilajali even is willing to, like, come in and buy it for. So, like, it's kind of one of those, like, the dominoes fell, and at the time not really in our favor, but in the sort of long run, when you do look at it with hindsight and a bit retrospectively, you go, well, if it hadn't happened in that way, we're probably not in the position we are now. And that doesn't mean that, you know, necessarily we're in the greatest position ever, but at least we do have an owner who's passionate about the club and like lots of things like that. So it's a bit of a sort of a black period in our, like, history, but I mean, it also meant, you know, silver linings. We got shuffled down to League One, but we got our first, you know, champ league, like, title
60 years or something, I think.
Yeah, you know, after this horrible little period, but yeah, I don't know. It was not fun. It was not fun watching. I think this is kind of the other thing. Like, we were talking at the beginning of, like, the current season about, like, how under Walter and stuff, it was hard to get motivated to watch. It just kind of felt like, you know, we were just going to go out and, you know, do the same old, and, you know, not get wins. And I think this second half of the 2019-20 season sort of fell into that same trap, or that same pattern, where it just didn't feel like, especially after we sold Bowen and Grosicki, you just went like, well, where are we going to, like, where are we going to get wins from? Who's going to step up? And we're producing the same sort of crap week in, week out. where like I think there's some significant, even not even in counting the horrible Chef Wednesday game, Wigan game. That like there's the 4-0 with Leeds and the 5-1 with Stoke. Like then there's a series of those really poor performances that just punctuate the second half of that season.
And I don't know if you remember at the time, I remember McCann, I think after those first few losses, Burnsy maybe, or one of the interview, maybe Bucking, maybe it was the Hull Daily Mail reporter or someone said, sort of raised the prospect of him of, are you concerned at all about the form and whether we're going to slip down the table and almost become part of the relegation battle? And he sort of scoffed at that and thought, we're sort of looking up the table at the playoff places, not the relegation picture, and was getting increasingly prickly and defensive, which has, I think anyone kind of would in that situation. You kind of feel like, as you say, like when Bowen and Grosicki are sold, it's so demoralizing for the whole club. So I'm sure for McCann, it just felt like the owners weren't supporting him. The fans were sort of turning on him. The media were turning on him. Of course, you're going to sort of put up the barriers and get defensive. But it was just an absolute horror show. And you're right. Like, I think it's interesting because it was COVID. I was probably more like, I don't know, like that. I'm sure I still watched all the games or followed all the games. And it was just one of those like strange times in our lives where I think I said to you before, like because we had the 2 lockdowns here in Australia, you kind of, everything blurs together in my mind of like this season and the League One season. And it did feel like in a way, the second half of the season was almost just like a prequel to the League One season, because you had a lot of those players, like you've got Malik Wilkes came in, you had Lewis Potter was starting to make a few appearances for City that season. You had like Elder sort of stepping up into the team as well. So and Honeyman as well, of course. So you had almost like the key players for that League One success. Magennis and Eves, of course, up top as well. You had those key players for that League One success sort of starting to come into the side. It was just at a level that was, I guess, maybe beyond them at that point.
Yeah, I think there were obviously like quite a few, I guess, like players who did really sort of step up. I think this is around the time where we start to see the rise of like Dan Batty and some of those other young guys as well, who were really useful in that League One season. And nice to see those kids coming through from like the academy into the first team and things. But overall, just a disappointing period of Hull City history.
It's funny because I think people always say with the playoffs, like playoffs are the best way to get promoted, but you'll only know that in hindsight. Where if you know that you're going to go up through the playoffs, it's great. Like playoff finals, fantastic. In a way, I see the same thing with this sort of relegation where you go in hindsight and you go, yep, we won the League One title. We got this young, exciting group of players. We sort of refreshed the squad and got a new owner out of it as well. You go, in hindsight, it's probably easier to stomach. Whereas some clubs suffer this. You look at like Bolton or Wigan even, like, we're talking about where Wigan got relegated this same season as us and they really haven't recovered at all. And like they're sort of, I think, towards the bottom of League One now. And you go, it can go one of two ways. So I remember at the time sitting down to do the League One preview, thinking if we can get mid-table League One, that's a good season, let alone what actually happened. So the spirits in the club, the morale, everything was at just an all-time low after this season. But in hindsight, at least, you can kind of go, okay, like the seeds were sort of there. I said to Brad on the previous episode, like Jacob Greaves went out on loan this season to Cheltenham, of course, to come into the side in the League One season as well. So you had these sort of seeds or building blocks of what was to become a really good core of the City team. We just didn't know it at the time, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess that's the joys of it. These are experiences that probably drove some of these players, motivated them to not, obviously nobody wants to go through that to begin with, but once you go through it, and especially like that sort of you're probably especially motivated, next time to go, well, we can't do that. We can't let the club down. We can't let the fans down. We can't let ourselves down and allow our, performances to slip or not be able to find ways to get those results. So I think even in that League One season, and I keep jumping forward, but like
I think that's the only way to cope with. It's the only way to cope with talking about this season is to reflect on the League One season. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think like there were games in there where even like we maybe didn't play. Like there were big sessions that season where we were great, but there were games where you go like, oh, we're not really at it today. But I think we were able then still to like able to still find a way to get points out of some of those games where, and I think that was maybe you argue, well, the opposition's of a weaker standard than it is in the championship, sure, but also I think that's like a little bit of lessons learned. Like you just can't afford to not be able to find points. So which we were atrocious at doing.
Yeah, I've got the image up now for probably the lowest point in my time supporting City, I've got to say. The 8-0 defeat to Wigan. I just remember I was sitting there at, I guess it must have been like 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. or whatever it was, and 7-0 at halftime, and just thinking, this is sort of unprecedented. Like there was the 7-1 defeat to Spurs on the last day of the Premier League season. We were already down, but this was just on another level. And it's hard because normally at this stage of the episode, we sort of look back on any sort of highlights or games that we enjoyed in that half of the season. And outside of the Middlesbrough game that we used the audio for the intro to the episode, there wasn't really any wins. So there's not too many highlights to call on. I guess the 4-4 with Swansea was probably the other fun game where we did see a couple of the newer signings scoring goals and, offering a bit of hope that perhaps we were sort of finding our feet with the new side, like Wilkes and Maddison on the score sheet. I think that must have actually that was February. So that was right before the COVID lockdown. But it just never felt like, I don't know. I'm trying to just think back to like what I actually thought at the time. Like I haven't listened to any of the old podcast episodes, but I'm sure we were sat there thinking, no, we'll get out of this. Like, we just need to get a couple of wins together. Like, we're sliding down the table, but because we only slid into the relegation zone quite late, but given the fact we just weren't winning games, like it just never felt like there was a chance of staying up.
Yeah, I'd be it would actually be really interesting to listen back and see what we said, because you're probably right. We're probably like, oh, we just got to get to like 45 points, and that's only like 2 wins in the last like 6 games or something, and that or whatever. Just like we're so close, and then we'll be safe. Like last season, these are the relegated teams were only on like this many points, and like I bet we were, but it was.
But it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I think I think that the 4-4 with Swansea, probably was, one of the few, I guess, highlights, in a sense that you're right. Like we scored a few goals, it gave us a glimmer of hope in that moment. That because that was like we'd had 3 or 4 losses in a row, not going great, not scored many goals. Then come out and rescued a point in the dying minutes and scored 4 in a game, and probably thought, okay, well, this can't be it can't be all bad. Surely we're turning a corner, but obviously not. But I think that's probably about the best performance overall, apart from, as you say, sort of snatching the win against Borough in the dying minutes of extra time, but.
And I guess the Chelsea FA Cup game was I always say every year we sit here and we talk FA Cup fixtures and I go, if we could get a Premier League club, it'd be fun and whatever. And we got it against Chelsea and we gave them a game. It was, 2-1 in the end in front of a full KCOM. It was sort of, I guess, the closest that we've been. Well, I guess, we'll talk. Well, we won't talk, but the following season we did play Leeds in the League Cup and beat them when they were in the Premier League, which was quite enjoyable. But this felt like the closest we came to sort of going toe to toe with like a big Premier League club in a while. But yeah, I guess that's probably the other highlight.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's always nice to play Premier League opposition, and I think that was probably, I guess, the game itself. We put out a good account of ourselves, and I think like we probably felt pretty confident after that as well. We gave Premier League club like a good run. We really pushed them, and then just couldn't translate that form into the league either. So,
Any final thoughts on this season before we draw a line under it? I think it's been highlighted in the way we've talked about it, that it's all in the context of the seasons that came after it. I think it's the only way to really contemplate it or come to terms with it. But any closing thoughts?
Oh man, I don't know. I think the hardest thing has been like trying to look back, trying to find even like footage of.
I think the club's
like
just trying to erase it.
Because I was trying to find highlights of like goals of the season or like
Yeah.
anything, and it was like even trying to look up the 4-4 with Swansea, I really struggled to find like the footage from that. I could only find one on like Sky, the Sky website,
right.
but it's geo locked, so I couldn't access it. So it's hard, but like I mean, technically they were still there in this half of the season. So in terms of favorite player, I can still do that. I can still go Bowen because he was there. And because I had a Bowen jersey, I think from maybe that season, or it might have been the one before.
Right. I think this is one of the few seasons I didn't get kits from, probably because of the.
What was the away kit for this season? Was it the plain white with question. Because the Bowen kit I had was like plain white with I think like an orange stripe on the shoulder, maybe.
This one's plain white. It looks like it's plain white with like black cuffs. The third kit was that aqua one, which when I was talking to Brad for the first half of the season. I think that was when I see that aqua third kit, I only think of. Do you remember Norbert Bloch, the striker who scored like I don't know if he scored for us, but that Forest game where I think Bowen scored the winner and then Bloch went down injured or something, and the Forest fans just went absolutely mental at him. Whenever I see that kit, I just always think of him. Yeah. I mean, look.
No, it must have been the season before that I had. It was white, but it was different to that one, I think. So.
Right.
But I did have a Bowen kit at some point.
Yeah. Well, look, I think to finish it off, just as sort of a palate cleanser from the discussion of that 1920 season, I thought, and actually I've realized that top left image technically isn't from the 2010s in terms of seasons. It is in the 09-10 Premier League season, but anyway, thought just get your I guess your highlight from the 2010s, as it were, and your favorite player and even your favorite goal if you have one.
Favorite goal is easy. It's the start that the 2016-17, I think, the one up where we started we played Leicester on the first day after they just won the Premier League, and the double bicycle between was it Diamanda and Hernandez, I think.
Yeah, nice.
So that's my favorite. Actually, Hernandez is probably like even though he never really like properly got going to the extent that I really hoped he would. I always really liked him. He's probably up there as a favorite player, or Huddleston. Very different, but I think one of the other best memories I have is when he scored that goal against Fulham in the like 5-1 or whatever it was, and then like runs off to the sideline to like cut his hair because he was waiting until he scored a goal to do it, and it was like doing it all for like charity and stuff. So that was like a really cool moment. I don't know, but like it's hard to go past stuff like the FA Cup final and things as well. Like I remember like I had my mate who was living with me at the time who'd like kicked out of home, and he was sort of living with us, and we got up to watch and we started watching, and then he had to go to work, and so he missed like the second half, and so I was giving him so much shit because he was an Arsenal fan. And then like and then like he came home and he was just like, "So, how was the game?" And I was just like, "Don't even." So,
I think that's sort of like equally my highlight and my low light is that FA Cup final, just from like the 2-0 up with Davies scoring that goal. And I sort of think, there are a few goals like you said there. You to pick like we've had some really memorable moments, like Davies scoring to make it 2-0, Diami in the playoff final. Hernandez.
That was the other game that I thought of that was real. That playoff final was crazy because I think the keeper was it Westwood maybe. He was so good that game. Just like it felt like we should have been like 3 or 4-0 up, and we just couldn't get it past him. And it actually started to feel like we were just never going to get through, and they were going to like get some cheap, scrappy goal and do us over. And then
it was such a weird game as well, just to feel like it's so rare for us to be the the dominant team in that sort of game. Like normally where like in the FA Cup final, like where the plucky underdog or whatever, like it was such a different sort of sense of emotions to be like, we're the ones expected to win. We have to score the goal. And like the longer it went, the more nervous it got. So it was good to get it done.
Yeah, it was. But yeah, those are a few good memories. So it's weird. I remember some stuff. I actually like. It's crazy. I can't. This like the season we came to talk about 5 years ago. Can't remember. Can remember almost nothing. But then like you go another 5 years back, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this game and this game and this like this player.
Yeah, and like I guess it just highlights, like the positive memories do stick with you more clearly, and so it is interesting. Like it's sort of where I look at the front. It always seems to come back to discussions on Rosanio, and I don't mean it to, but it does kind of come back to my frustrations around what happened with last season, where I go, yeah, we missed the playoffs, but we had some really memorable games, some really memorable experiences. Finishing 7th wasn't the end of the world, and it's almost like that's sort of what sticks in your mind when you support a football team more so than. I mean, sure, absolutely promotion sticks with you as well, but those games sort of stick in your memory as well along the way. It doesn't need to be all about the end and the destination. It can be about the journey.
Yeah.
And like, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I guess like because like while there are lots of good, like obviously like all the things I've talked about are like great moments and all really good. There are still some things that were really like atrocious that we looked at and just went like, what the hell? Like when Steve Bruce walked away and we have like the photo from their training camp where it's like David Myler and a handful of others, Dawson, Myler, a few senior players, and there's like 8 of them, and they go like, this is the team. And we, Mike Phelan takes charge for the start of the season, and we can't, and like we saw, but even through that, you saw, like the Jakupovic's like rebirth and some of those sorts of, like things. So, but they just didn't feel. Even those moments didn't feel as bad as like, and maybe that's just because we're in the Prem or something. But like they didn't. And to be honest, like to have that such a small core of senior players at that point heading into a Prem should have been way more devastating than probably like the second half of this season, even though and then but then you get through that Prem season, we still only just like, yes, we sacked, like Phelan left and Silva came in, but we only just like missed out on safety anyway. Like it came down to the last few games of that anyway. And in that season, there's still like some great things. Like there's the 2-0 over Everton and stuff with Nias like getting some
League
goals.
Cup semi-final.
Yeah. I think we do over Liverpool. I think maybe a 1-0 or something. Like there's some like quality stuff, and like I probably like at the end of that season, probably the biggest disappointment for me is not necessarily going down. It's that Silva doesn't want to stay with us.
Yeah.
That's the thing that probably upset me most about that. Anyway, sorry, I've got
No. It's kind of crazy to think like, the 2010s was such a diverse decade for City where you sort of start pre-Allams really, which is kind of crazy to think. Like it was that they bought the club in December of 2010 all the way through to the end of 2020, which was basically, like you said, basically the end of their time in charge. And everything that went on in between, like, as much as it's about the 2010s, it's almost as much about the Allams ownership, where you go from the highs of Bruce and the FA Cup final in Europe and everything else to the lows of selling Bowen and Grosicki, the name change, the membership scheme,
protests,
So very very busy time for City. And it is funny, like even with the Jun in charge now, it does feel a lot, and like as crazy as it's been on the pitch the last few years, it does feel a lot more stable in the sense that I think if we were to look back on the 2020s, I don't think it's as like wild, you know what I mean? Like the highs and lows are much closer together, which I don't know if that's necessarily good or bad, but I guess we'll see.
That sounds like stability to me, and that's what you want out of a football club.
I think you're right. Well, look, as I said at the start of the episode, thanks so much for stepping in last minute for this. It's been really good to kind of get the closure on this series of episodes and bookend the 2010s. So very much appreciate you stepping in.
That's all right. I'm pretty much always available. So
Yeah.
I don't know
So
how,
much,
but I always find time.
yeah. No, it's very much appreciated. And thank you everyone for listening in. This is the end of our Decades Flashback series of episodes. If you haven't watched or listened to some of the older episodes, go back and have a listen now that we've got the complete set. Good to sort of relive all the memories of these seasons. But otherwise, we'll be back next week for our regular programming to talk the West Brom and Oxford results. So until then, go well and come on City.